I'm McKinley Foster, 31, a nurse practitioner. The champagne glass trembled as my mother, Eleanor, stood up at my graduation dinner. She spoke into the silence, her voice cold. "Honestly, we wish you'd never been born." The entire restaurant went silent. My father, Robert, nodded. My brothers, Tyler and Brandon, smirked. I put my glass down, met each of their eyes, and replied calmly, "Then live your lives as if I never existed." I made them a promise that night, but a promise like that requires more than just walking away. How do you truly erase yourself from a family that already treated you like you didn't exist? I grew up in Seattle as the family disappointment. My brothers, Tyler and Brandon, were the golden boys as future millionaires, destined for prestige. My career as a nurse practitioner, despite years of dedication and study, was consistently dismissed as not real medicine. They were too busy celebrating Tyler's minor promotions to notice I worked through school, often juggling 2 jobs just to fund my own education. My achievement was invisible. I bought my own champagne for that graduation toast. Being the family disappointment forces you into fierce independence. But how long can quiet resilience last before the constant dismissal shatters your hope completely? I spent my days as a nurse practitioner healing strangers, caring for their wounds, easing their fears, treating their pain. Yet, my own family never tried to heal me. Every single family gathering felt like a performance where I was the unwanted extra, silently praying for validation. My father, Robert, once looked at my advanced degree certificate hanging on the wall and just called it cute. Cute. A decade of grinding work, student debt, and clinical excellence reduced to a single, patronizing word. That's how much my dedication meant to them. Despite all the dismissals, I stayed hopeful for years. The human mind is wired for connection, and I was convinced that if I just kept giving, kept achieving, kept paying my emotional dues, one day they would simply see my inherent worth. I was wrong. My belief that success would earn their love was the biggest lie I told myself. What's the one thing you keep doing for your family, hoping it will finally earn you the respect you deserve? At my own graduation dinner, my parents used the spotlight not to celebrate, but to execute. My mother, Eleanor, raised her voice so the nearby tables could hear. McKinley only became a nurse practitioner because she wasn't smart enough to be a doctor. Laughter followed, a chorus of family agreement. I smiled tightly, swallowing the burn, trying not to cry, trying to hold on to the shred of dignity that decade of work had earned me. That was the moment the old hope inside me finally shattered. They thought they broke me, but they only freed me. What is the last, most painful insult you received that actually became the trigger for your ultimate escape? The public humiliation wasn't the first offense. It was just the loudest. My parents constantly called my workplace asking for family favors, urgent money, back-channel prescriptions, or connections to bypass the system. They viewed my professional life not as my achievement, but as their personal service desk. My professional integrity was tested repeatedly. When I refused their unethical demands, citing my sense of duty and ethics, my brothers would mock me, "Look at the little martyr, taking her job too seriously." They saw ethics as an inconvenience, and my boundaries as a personal insult. When a toxic family views your career as a tool, not a triumph, that's when you know your professional success is actually their biggest threat. What valuable asset of yours is your family currently trying to convert into a family favor? Despite their constant sabotage, I kept pouring myself into my career. I worked double shifts, volunteered at community health programs, and spent my weekends mentoring young nurses. Each success was a desperate, silent plea. See me, validate me, be proud of me. Every one of my achievements was met with silence at home. My mother, Eleanor, only ever called when she needed something, a prescription refill, or a donation check for a charity she supported. My existence was purely transactional. The emotional exhaustion was suffocating. When you realize your greatest professional triumphs are met with silence, you have to ask yourself, what price am I paying to belong to a family that only sees me as a service? I received an award for my contributions to public health, a huge honor in my field. My family was, predictably, absent. When I texted them the photo of the plaque, their collective response was nothing. Pure, echoing silence. Instead, they spent the next week bragging about my brother's business deals on social media. That night, sitting alone with the heavy plaque, I finally understood. The silence was not oversight, it was deliberate. Insults are violence, but this sustained, deliberate silence was more violent, it was erasure. I realized my worth was a threat to their narrative, and they would never acknowledge it. They were determined to keep me the family failure, even as I was winning in the real world. That was the last piece of hope I had to let go of before I was truly ready to fulfill their wish. The silence was my final lesson in self-worth. What form of silence is your family using to control you, and what award will you win to make that silence truly painful for them? Eleanor's cruel words, "Wish you'd never been born," echoed through the silent room. For the first time, I didn't feel the familiar rush of shame or the automatic urge to defend myself. I didn't explain my degree, I didn't apologize for my existence. I just stood there, suspended in absolute clarity. My focus went to the small, silver nurse's pin resting by my plate, the one I paid for myself. It was the symbol of my independence, my professionalism, everything they mocked. I picked it up, slow and deliberate, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. That action was my final, silent refusal to engage. I looked them dead in the eye, one last time, and delivered the calmest sentence of my life, "Then live your lives as if I never existed." I turned, not with fury, but with quiet relief, and walked away. The sound of their gasps was the last noise they ever made that mattered to me. Walking away was the easy part. The hard part was fulfilling that promise. What is the one physical item you would need to symbolically reclaim to officially declare your independence from your toxic family? I walked through the opulent dining room, past the stunned waiters and the silent, judging faces. Each step I took was a physical severing. I walked straight out into the cold Seattle night. The sound of forced laughter and desperate whispers from their table faded behind me like static on an old radio. I consciously left my designer coat draped over the chair. It was a gift from my parents, expensive, beautiful, and utterly symbolic of the ties they used to control me. Leaving it there, cold and alone, was my silent rebellion. I didn't need their velvet prison anymore. I preferred the biting air of freedom. There was no rage left, only a profound, dizzying sense of lightness. I was financially independent, professionally successful, and now, finally, emotionally free. The emptiness was the silence of a battle finally won. I stopped walking when the last echo of their world was completely gone. I had walked away from their money and their control. But true separation takes cold, hard logistics. What is the first, most terrifying step you need to take at home to erase yourself from your family's life legally and emotionally? I got home, and the process began. It was methodical, steady, like preparing for a difficult surgery. I didn't smash things or rage. I just deleted. I deleted family photos from the walls, erased their contacts from my phone, and boxed up every memory, good and bad, and taped the box shut. I immediately contacted a specialized lawyer. My objective was simple: legal erasure. I researched procedures for name changes, updated my will to exclude every single relative, and established an irrevocable trust for my assets. The time for emotional responses was over, it was time for paperwork. The most complex part was the financial severance. I changed bank accounts, canceled shared subscriptions, and crucially, took over the mortgage of my house completely, removing any potential financial leverage they might have tried to use as a last resort emotional trap. Control meant total independence. The name change wasn't vanity, it was survival. McKinley Foster carried the weight of their disapproval. The new name I chose, which I won't disclose yet, was clean, professional, and entirely mine. It represented a person they had no history with, no control over, and no access to. I set up new protocols with my clinic and my bank. Any inquiries from the Foster family were to be immediately shut down. No exceptions. This wasn't anger. It was the surgical removal of a life-threatening tumor. My peace was the outcome, and I wasn't risking recurrence. As the hours passed, working through the documents, the cold, methodical focus brought a surprising inner peace. I wasn't running from them anymore. I was building something secure for myself. This deliberate construction of my boundary was my greatest act of self-love. The quiet work of legal separation is your true revenge. But what happens when the legal system delivers the final, shocking blow to the toxic family? What is the one legal document your family fears the most, and how will you use it to secure your final freedom? Days later, the expected digital attack began. My phone exploded with messages, a predictable cycle of anger, guilt, and panicked manipulation. First, the fury, "You're ungrateful, you've ruined the family name." Then, the gaslighting, "You're overreacting, it was just a joke." They escalated to fake concern, "You're still our daughter, we need to talk, your mother is heartbroken." All the emotional language they never used when I needed it was deployed as a weapon to pull me back into the drama. The volume was high, but the signal was zero. I didn't block them immediately. Instead, I read, studied, and observed their tactics. It was like reading a textbook on narcissistic supply. Every text, every voicemail was a piece of data confirming my decision. The more desperate they became, the clearer my path of separation felt. My brothers, Tyler and Brandon, tried to involve the business angle, hinting that my success depended on their connections. The irony was hilarious. They didn't realize that by walking away from them, I was walking towards a much more valuable network, one based on mutual respect, not familial debt. I maintained absolute radio silence in response to the chaos. My silence was my power. It forced them to confront the void I had created, a void they were solely responsible for. They couldn't stand the lack of control. Their panic fed my certainty. Their chaos confirmed the fundamental truth: they didn't miss me, McKinley the person. They missed their nurse practitioner, their ATM, their emotional punching bag. And I had just closed the service window forever. Observing their desperation was the final research I needed. But what was the last, most powerful financial tie I had to sever to make my non-existence official, and what price did they pay for its removal? The digital noise subsided, replaced by a chilling physical attack. A heavy, linen envelope arrived. Inside, a formal invitation to an intervention luncheon where my brothers would explain my responsibilities. It wasn't an invitation, it was a subpoena demanding my submission. Eleanor included a handwritten note. It wasn't apologetic. It was a threat thinly disguised as motherly concern, referencing a clause in the family trust that required all children to maintain regular contact to receive their eventual inheritance share. A financial leash, pulled taut. They always thought the money was the key. But I saw the flaw. The clause was vague, easily exploited. They feared my success and my independence more than they valued my presence. Their desperate move gave me the final, necessary piece of intelligence, the exact source of their control. I closed the door on McKinley the victim. A new woman sat down at the table, armed with legal documents and 5 years of suppressed resentment. My goal shifted from mere separation to active dismantling. I wouldn't just disappear, I would ensure their wish came true, but at a cost. Tyler and Brandon, the Golden Boys, were the weakest links. Their businesses were built on borrowed capital and inflated prestige, exactly the kind of instability that a legal challenge to their expected family wealth would instantly expose and threaten. Targeting their pride was targeting their wallet. I began drafting a sworn affidavit documenting every instance of emotional abuse, financial coercion, and public humiliation, the very record they thought had been erased. This wasn't revenge in the dark, this was revenge under the harsh, unforgiving light of the Seattle legal system. McKinley Foster was officially dead. The new identity was registered, the legal maneuvers filed. The name change was more than just a formality, it was the final, impenetrable boundary. When the inevitable legal firestorm started, the woman they attacked would no longer exist. I sat back, the intervention invitation still on the table. I didn't need to attend. My answer was already on its way, delivered by the cold, impartial hand of the law. The silence in my apartment wasn't emptiness, it was the deafening quiet before the explosion. I had the legal key to their wealth and the evidence of their abuse. But how do you use the strict letter of the law to punish a toxic family for a single, cruel wish, and what shocking evidence do you file to truly shatter their public facade? The legal notices landed like grenades. The family trust was frozen, the name change finalized. The financial instability I targeted hit Tyler and Brandon's businesses instantly. They didn't understand the complex legal paperwork, they only saw the bottom line bleeding out. Their panic quickly transformed into rage. They tried calling my old number, contacting the lawyer, even showing up at my apartment, all to a dead end. Their golden boy privilege had never prepared them for consequences. They needed a visible target for their fury, and I knew exactly where they would look. They showed up at the clinic during peak hours. Tyler, looking like a caged animal, and Brandon, pale with stress. They demanded to see McKinley Foster. They created a scene right in front of my staff and patients, shouting about fraud and betrayal. This was exactly the public spectacle I knew they were capable of. I approached them, not as the scared sister they remembered, but as the head nurse practitioner they were disturbing. My voice was calm, professional, my eyes completely detached. I had spent 2 weeks rehearsing this scene in my head. They were mere disruptors now, not family. Tyler lunged forward, grabbing my arm. "Where is McKinley? We need answers about the trust." I pulled my arm away gently, making the contact feel irrelevant. "I don't know who you're talking to. That name, McKinley Foster, doesn't exist here anymore." Brandon tried the guilt trip, "You can't do this to Mom." I met his eyes. "Your mother wished I was never born." I simply granted her wish. All future communications must go through my legal representative, whose details you already have. I then walked away. I continued my rounds, checking charts, assisting a patient. My staff, witnessing the entire scene, were confused but fiercely loyal. My brothers were left standing in the waiting area. Stunned, their sense of entitlement dissolving in the reality that the person they hated, yet needed, was officially gone. They finally got their wish, I was erased. But the best revenge is the one you don't even need to watch. Who steps in to become the new, true family when you leave the old one in ruins, and how does their acceptance redefine your existence? After my brothers stormed out, the clinic manager, Sarah, didn't ask a single question about the trust fund or the name change. Instead, she asked if I needed a minute. Later that day, my coworkers threw a small, impromptu gathering in the break room to celebrate my promotion to head nurse practitioner. To Collins. She doesn't just heal patients, she stabilizes the whole clinic. She's the person who stays late, advocates for the low income, and never compromises her ethics. "We see you, Collins." I felt seen. Truly seen. Not as a daughter or a sister perpetually failing to meet impossible standards, but as a person who matters, whose work matters, and whose boundaries were respected. This true connection, the kind built on shared values and mutual respect, was the antithesis of my family life. My blood relatives spent decades trying to shrink me to fit their narrative. These colleagues, whom I had known for years but weren't family by definition, chose to amplify my worth. They celebrated my promotion. My mother had celebrated my failure. The contrast was a balm to the surgical wound I had inflicted. The definition of family revenge changed for me right then. It wasn't about the freezing of a trust fund, it was about replacing the toxicity with genuine warmth. This wasn't a temporary band-aid, it was the foundation of a chosen life. My new family didn't share my DNA, but they shared my integrity. I had worried that cutting them off would leave me utterly alone. Instead, by removing the constant noise of disapproval, I created the space for real, reciprocal relationships to flourish. I realized that the love you build is always stronger and safer than the love you inherit. That day, I learned the true meaning of winning. Winning wasn't them losing the money. Winning was me finally gaining a life where I didn't have to apologize for existing. It was the best promotion of all. I had gained my peace, but the story wasn't over. The true test of my resolve came years later, when the person who wished me gone needed my help the most. How do you face the ultimate moral choice, caring for the toxic parent who abused you, and still honor the boundaries you fought so hard to create? Life as Colin Simmons was clean, focused, and free of emotional debt. I poured the energy I used to spend defending myself into my work. I published a widely cited paper on community health, bought a small sailboat, and began volunteering at the free clinic every Thursday. The silence on my end was deafening to the Fosters. I only ever heard about them through public channels. Tyler's real estate venture, built on inflated promises and family credit, collapsed under the pressure of the frozen trust. His desperation led to disastrous, highly public financial decisions. Brandon, always relying on mom and dad's connections, found himself completely isolated professionally. The legal affidavit I filed, a detailed account of their financial coercion, leaked discreetly through the legal channels I established. The Golden Boy narrative dissolved into public humiliation. Eleanor and Robert, stripped of their power and their human ATM, fractured. They always controlled the children through money and shame. When both failed, they turned the toxicity inward. Their social standing plummeted as their children's failures became undeniable and very public news items. My ultimate revenge wasn't the lawsuit, it was the silence. They couldn't stand being ignored. My lack of emotional reaction to their downfall meant they had failed to draw me back into their orbit. I was the ghost who haunted them not with noise, but with my sheer, utter non-existence. I learned that the best way to defeat a bully is to win a better life that they cannot access, cannot comment on, and cannot ruin. My success was built on ethics, hard work, and genuine respect, the very things they dismissed. The toast had shattered, and I was finally free of the crumbs. They had faded into the background noise of Seattle gossip, a footnote in the story of my new life. I never reached out. I never checked the news. For all intents and purposes, McKinley Foster was dead, and Colin Simmons was thriving. I found freedom and success in the silence. But every great tragedy has one final act. What unexpected health crisis forces a former toxic parent back into your professional life, and how do you maintain your sacred boundaries when the choice is life or death? Years passed in serene, successful silence. Then, the inevitable happened. A late-night call from the affiliated hospital. Robert Foster, my father, was admitted with severe complications, a complex case requiring the specific expertise of the head nurse practitioner. Me. I walked into the ICU, not as a daughter, but as Colin Simmons, NP. My father was weak, tubes everywhere. My mother, Eleanor, was by his side, her face finally stripped of its arrogance. She recognized me immediately, despite the name change and the professional uniform. McKinley. Collins, please. You're the best. You're the one. You have to save him. We need you. The words were an admission of my value. The desperate, 11th-hour validation I'd craved for decades. But the craving was gone. I felt nothing but professional assessment. Mrs. Foster, I am the nurse practitioner assigned to your husband's care. My priority is his clinical outcome. All personal matters are irrelevant and will not influence my professional judgment. I advise you to step back. The shift to formal address was deliberate and cold. I performed my duties flawlessly. I reviewed Robert's chart, consulted the physician, adjusted his drip. Every action was guided by my oath and my ethics, the very things they mocked. I treated him exactly as I would any other patient, efficiently, expertly, and without a shred of personal emotion. I realized the true horror for Eleanor wasn't that I wouldn't save him, but that I would, and it wouldn't change anything. She was finally face to face with the person she created, a highly competent, emotionally bulletproof professional who had utterly erased her. When I had to administer a painful injection, I leaned close. He looked terrified. I didn't soften my tone. This is necessary to save your life. Mr. Foster. You will feel pain. I won't stop until the job is done. My words were a clinical echo of his cold dismissal years ago. Robert stabilized. I ensured the best care, then signed off the case to another nurse practitioner and walked out. I didn't say goodbye, nor did I look back. I granted Eleanor's wish. I treated him as if he were a complete stranger whose existence held no emotional weight for me. The whole episode was a test of my boundaries. And I passed. There was no vengeful satisfaction, just the deep, quiet knowledge that I was a professional, an ethical person, and that their control was truly dead. My love was gone, my duty remained. That was my final triumph. The best revenge is living a life where their crises are merely work assignments, and their past emotional damage holds the significance of a discarded medical glove. My life was built on my own terms, and they could only witness it from the periphery. The shattered toast was finally paid for. Not with anger, but with the cold currency of indifference. I gave them exactly what they asked for, a world where McKinley Foster never existed. The professional choice was the right choice, but it was also the ultimate fulfillment of my revenge. What is the final, most satisfying piece of news you need to hear about your former toxic family to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that your erasure was complete and permanent? After the ICU incident, the silence that followed wasn't just the absence of their noise, it was the presence of my peace. My revenge was complete, but the healing had just begun. Winning the fight against them was one thing, winning the fight for my own self-worth was another. I continued therapy, learning to separate the voice of Eleanor from my own inner critic. The key was accepting that their cruelty was never about my value, it was about their need for control. I had to consciously dismantle the negative programming piece by piece, like removing old, infected sutures. The relationships with my chosen family deepened. Sarah and my colleagues weren't just co-workers, they were anchors, proving that I was capable of giving and receiving healthy, unconditional respect. I learned that trust wasn't a commodity to be earned under duress, but a gift freely given. I am Colin Simmons. I am a highly ethical, successful healthcare provider. The woman McKinley Foster who desperately sought approval is a historical footnote. My revenge was financial and legal, but my freedom is emotional. That is the true, quiet resolution. The greatest act of revenge is becoming the person they tried to destroy. How do you define the success of your final chapter, and what advice would you give to someone trapped, still craving the love of their toxic family? I met with my lawyer, Mr. Harrison. The legal battle over the frozen family trust was finally resolved. Because of the ambiguous regular contact clause and my sworn affidavit, the court granted me a significant portion of the assets, far more than the inheritance they had initially tried to dangle over me. The funds are yours, Collins. A substantial amount. You can move on entirely. I looked at the check. It wasn't money, it was the distilled essence of years of emotional pain. Taking it and spending it would be a symbolic victory, but it wouldn't be the final act of healing I truly needed. Then, Harrison handed me one last document. The family home, the place where the shattered toast happened, was facing foreclosure due to the Fosters' overwhelming debt and mismanagement. It was going to auction. They were losing the symbolic center of their narcissistic control. The thought flashed through my mind, buy it. Buy the house, tear it down, or use it as a storage unit for medical supplies. The ultimate public humiliation. It was the last, subtle whisper of McKinley Foster, the vengeful daughter. I had to silence that whisper. Mr. Harrison, I want you to use the entirety of the court-awarded funds to purchase the Foster estate at auction. I don't want the land or the property. I want the deed. He looked confused. And what do you intend to do with the deed? I directed Harrison to immediately sign the deed over to the Seattle Community Health Foundation, the charity I volunteer for, the one my mother always refused to donate to. The property would be converted into a low-income senior care facility. This was the perfect revenge. Not the money. Not the destruction. But the transformation. Their monument to elitism and emotional abuse would become a sanctuary of compassion and community support, a direct, living contradiction to everything they stood for. I stood outside the old Foster estate one last time. I watched the for sale sign being replaced by a sign announcing the new Collins Simmons Community Center. The name McKinley Foster had died. The new name, Collins Simmons, would forever be associated with healing and generosity, not with their toxic legacy. My final act of revenge was not about making them suffer, but about defining my own goodness on a scale they could never comprehend. I didn't need their toast anymore. I had raised my own. The ultimate freedom is choosing to build good where they built ruin. Now that Collins has her full revenge, what final, uplifting message about self-worth and chosen family will she leave with her viewers? I sit here now, in what used to be Eleanor's grand, silent study. The place where I was told my dreams were insignificant is now where I sign off on community grants and patient aid. The air here is different. It's not thick with judgment, it's light with purpose. I learned that revenge is a low-quality emotion. True justice isn't about making them miserable, it's about making you magnificent. The wealth they denied me built this center. The cruelty they inflicted was the fuel I needed to find my true self, Collins Simmons. The deepest wound they left was the lie that I was unworthy of love or success. The ultimate healing is recognizing the power of your own choice. I chose my name, I chose my worth, and I chose my family. You are never trapped if you are willing to face the fear of being alone. To anyone still sitting at a table with people who wish you didn't exist, get up. Your worth is not up for negotiation. Don't crave their limited, conditional love. Build a life so rich in genuine respect and purpose that their memory simply fades into irrelevance. I granted my mother's wish. McKinley Foster is a ghost. But Collins Simmons is a living monument to the fact that you can use the stones they threw at you to build a foundation strong enough to support an entire community. The story of McKinley Foster ends with a beginning. What is the single most important lesson you learned from my journey, and what boundary will you set today to start building your own monument to self-worth? The day the Collins Simmons Community Center opened was the true final chapter. The property, once a fortress of elitism, was filled with laughing seniors and community organizers. This was my public stand, not against the Fosters, but for the kind of ethical life they never could live. I stood at the podium in the garden, the same garden where the shattered toast took place years ago. The air was different, not heavy with shame, but light with potential. I chose to speak, not about revenge, but about the power of self-definition. The building we stand in today represents a radical boundary. It is a symbol that you do not owe your life, your gifts, or your success to the people who seek to destroy you. You owe it only to yourself and to the community that genuinely supports you. I made sure my message was clear. My success was a choice, not a reaction. I chose to take the money meant to chain me and used it to liberate others. That intentional act was the final nail in the coffin of the Foster legacy, replacing their history of toxicity with my history of benevolence. I never saw the Fosters at the event. But I knew the truth was inescapable. They saw the public transformation of their family symbol. They heard the cheers. Their greatest fear, that I would succeed without them and then actively undo their entire toxic structure, had come true. Colin Simmons is the spirit of healing, generosity, and unbreakable boundaries. She is the proof that you can take the rejection meant to crush you and turn it into the foundation of a magnificent, authentic life. This center is the antidote. Remember this: your family's opinion of you is none of your business. Your legacy is not inherited, it is built. Do not wait for their permission to be magnificent. Walk away, build your empire of self-worth, and raise your own glass. This is the end of the story of the shattered toast. What part of my journey, the name change, the legal fight, or the decision to build the community center, resonated most with you? And what new story are you ready to write for yourself? The opening of the Colin Simmons Community Center was a local sensation. The story was irresistible: the disgraced Foster family's mansion reborn as a nonprofit. The local Seattle gossip pages had a field day. Suddenly, their shame wasn't private, it was a front-page headline. Tyler, whose business was now officially bankrupt, blamed the foreclosure on market instability and corporate treachery. He needed a narrative to save face, but the narrative of the vengeful, brilliant sister was simply better and louder than his denial. Brandon went a different route. He tried to contact me, not with rage, but pathetic attempts at reconciliation. He finally grasped that his comfortable life was entirely conditional, and the one person who could have rebuilt it for him was the one he helped push out. Eleanor and Robert were effectively silenced. They couldn't sue the foundation without publicly admitting the abuse allegations in my affidavit. Their pride was their prison. They lived in a much smaller world now, defined by their debts, not their influence. I was grabbing coffee near the clinic when I saw Brandon. He was waiting tables at a small, mediocre cafe, a crushing blow to his former golden boy status. I almost kept walking, but I needed the full resolution. I approached his table. "Collins? McKinley? What are you doing here?" Calmly am getting a large coffee, Brandon. "And you're serving it." The look on his face was the full admission of his failure. It wasn't anger I saw, but a deep, hollow resentment, directed mostly at himself. "Look, the house, the trust, it's all Mom's fault. She made us. If you would just call her, she'd settle. It's not too late. You could still." He stopped, realizing the absurdity of asking the NP who owned his childhood home to rescue his parents. "Brandon, you and Tyler were adults. You made your own choices. You chose the cruelty over the connection. There is no going back. The past doesn't exist. McKinley Foster is gone. Enjoy your shift." I paid for my coffee, left a generous tip for the sake of the cafe, and walked out. I also received an email, forwarded by my lawyer. Tyler was suing Brandon, blaming him for giving me the wrong advice about the trust. The family was imploding, turning the cruelty they once focused on me onto each other, all because their financial props were gone. They always needed a scapegoat. When I was there, it was me. Now that I was gone, they blamed each other. The ultimate truth was that the Foster family was inherently flawed and corruptible, and all I did was remove the glue, the money and the hierarchy that held the toxicity together. I didn't need to gloat. My life was the monument to my victory. Their life was the monument to their mistakes. I walked back to my center, past the laughter of the community, and felt the deepest, most quiet satisfaction. The battle was over, and I was, truly, free. The Fosters got their wish, I was erased. But in my place, a force of good was born. If you could choose one sentence to perfectly sum up your emotional freedom from a toxic past, what would it be? The community center buzzed with life. Every hug, every handshake, every thank you was a nail in the coffin of my past. This wasn't conditional love tied to a bank account. This was appreciation earned through years of genuine service. This was my true validation. To Collins, who always told me her greatest fear was being invisible. Now, look around. You are the most visible, foundational rock of this entire community. You didn't just escape your past, you built a future that eclipses it. Sarah's words resonated. For decades, the Fosters had actively worked to render McKinley invisible, unlovable, and incompetent. In contrast, my chosen family and community celebrated Colin Simmons for being competent, ethical, and indispensable. Collins, I heard about the house, dear. Your family, they were so grand, so cold. Now, I sit in their ballroom and get my blood pressure checked. You didn't just win a lawsuit. You brought light into a place full of shadows. In that moment, the revenge, the legal filings, the financial ruin, it all shrank into insignificance. The true victory wasn't their loss, it was the creation of a tangible, living good where toxicity once reigned. My purpose was my shield and my greatest achievement. My journey proved that you don't need their apology to heal. You don't need their permission to thrive. You need the courage to redefine yourself completely and commit to your own values. That is the final, unbreakable boundary. I walk forward, not carrying the weight of the Foster name, but supported by the strength of the Colin Simmons community. That support is the real inheritance, one that can never be frozen, stolen, or taken away. Now that you've seen my full journey from the shattered toast to the unbreakable boundary, what personal choice will you make today to honor your own worth and build your unshakable, chosen life? The chaos of the Fosters faded into a historical event, like an old newspaper clipping. My life was no longer reactive, but expansive. I had space to breathe, to love, and to pursue things that brought genuine joy, not forced compliance. I learned to live for myself, not against them. The mental energy I used to spend on defense, anxiety, and trying to win their impossible approval was finally liberated. I channeled it all into the clinic, into teaching the next generation of nurse practitioners, and into my community. The results were immediate and profound. For the first time, I looked in the mirror and didn't see McKinley Foster, perpetually flawed and inadequate. I saw Colin Simmons, competent, compassionate, and whole. Self-love wasn't a concept, it was the quiet, unshakable foundation of my existence. My sailboat, the Phoenix, became my sanctuary. Out on the water, the horizon was wide open. There were no Fosters. Just me, navigating the open sea, a perfect metaphor for the life I had built. I was the captain, choosing the direction, accepting the weather. The Fosters wanted a legacy of wealth and hierarchy. My legacy is this community center, where no one is judged for their financial status or their last name. It's built on the understanding that true worth is measured by how you treat the most vulnerable, not how much you own. I never sought reconciliation or forgiveness from them. And I didn't need to forgive them to be free. Forgiveness is for the forgiver, but sometimes, simple, permanent distance is the purest form of self-preservation. I chose preservation over the psychological labor of forgiveness. There were still fleeting moments, a scent, a song, a holiday, that triggered the old grief. But now, I could acknowledge the pain without letting it control me. The memory of the shattered toast remains, but it's no longer a curse, it's a compass pointing toward my self-made success. The greatest weapon they wielded was the threat of rejection. When I embraced their rejection and built my life outside their system, they lost all power. My rejection of their terms was the ultimate power move, leading to the truest form of unconditional self-acceptance. I have been McKinley Foster, the scapegoat, and Colin Simmons, the professional. But who I am now is simply me, a person who survived betrayal, mastered her trauma, and chose to use her painful past to fuel her benevolent future. That is my personal resurrection story. Freedom is expensive. It cost me my past, my birth name, and the fantasy of a loving blood family. But the price was worth the currency of my current peace, purpose, and the unconditional love I receive from the family I chose. I learned that healthy relationships thrive on reciprocity, not obligation. They require respect, not submission. My colleagues, my friends, my patients, they are the ecosystem where Colin Simmons truly flourishes. The Foster garden was beautiful, but it was poisoned. Every morning, I wake up in a life that is completely my creation. I am the architect, the builder, and the resident. There is no blueprint dictated by ancestral ego, only the plans I draw for a future defined by empathy, ethics, and self-determination. Your story doesn't end where their cruelty began. It begins when you decide to pick up the pieces and build something indestructible. Something they can't touch, can't diminish, and can't claim credit for. That is the definition of a well-lived life after trauma. If you're waiting for them to apologize, stop. They won't. Start your new life today. Change your name, change your city, change your narrative. Embrace the magnificent loneliness of self-discovery and find your own phoenix. My life isn't just a tale of revenge, it's a manual for escape. The shattered toast taught me that the only person you owe your worth to is yourself. Build your life on that truth, and you will never be broken again. Now, I turn the final question to you. What is the first step you will take tomorrow to officially begin writing your own story of magnificent escape and resurrection? People ask me if I have closure. They picture a dramatic final confrontation. But closure isn't an event, it's a gradual state of mind. It's the moment you realize you haven't thought about your abuser all day. It's the day their past attempts to contact you don't even register. I finally understood the Fosters weren't supervillains, they were tragically limited people whose only tool for connection was control. Their cruelty was a projection of their own inner emptiness. Knowing this didn't excuse them, but it made them small. And small things can't hurt you. I never needed their permission to be happy, but I needed their silence. Once the legal separation was final, the true work began. I systematically undid all the toxic lessons they taught me, that success must be competitive, that love must be earned through sacrifice, and that I was disposable. The greatest inheritance I received was the peace that came from not inheriting their problems. They continue to self-destruct. Tyler and Brandon still squabble over the remnants of the debt. But it's their story now. My hands are clean, my heart is quiet, and my ledger is balanced. Silence is a choice, and it's your most powerful defense. I chose not to engage, not to explain, and not to seek validation after the final acts. They desperately wanted a reaction. They wanted me to confirm their importance. My silence proved they were irrelevant. McKinley Foster was a mask I wore to survive their environment. Colin Simmons is the face of the person I built in spite of them. Never underestimate the psychological power of a name change. It is a daily, visible affirmation that you own your identity. Your birth family gives you a story, your chosen family helps you edit it. And ultimately, you become the editor-in-chief. I deleted the chapters about shame and conditional love and replaced them with chapters about reciprocity, respect, and profound self-worth. The Fosters taught me money was control. I taught myself money was freedom, and better yet, a tool for benevolence. When I used their money to fund a community center, I stripped the currency of its toxic power and infused it with my ethical purpose. I will be honest, the initial rage was necessary. It was the energy required to break the chains. Don't feel guilty about your anger, honor it as the signpost that showed you where the abuse was and gave you the strength to leave. But once you're out, let the anger go. My days are simple: work, community, friends, sailing. They are filled with small, authentic moments that would have been crushed by the Foster machine. I choose peace over drama. I choose silence over chaos. I choose the sun over the shadows. I have a partner who sees my competence as beautiful, not threatening. I have friends who value my ethics, not my connections. My new life is not a compensation for the old one, it is a profound upgrade, built entirely on self-respect and intentional love. If you recognize yourself in McKinley Foster, know this: you are not broken, you were just handled roughly. You have the power to stop the cycle. Cut the thread, change the name, build your phoenix. Your success is your best revenge, and your peace is your ultimate victory. This entire story, the shattered toast, the lawsuit, the name change, the ICU crisis, the community center, it's all a long, complicated path to one simple destination: self-respect. When you respect yourself unconditionally, you cannot be manipulated. And that is the honest closure. Not a final word to the Fosters, but a final, powerful commitment to myself. I choose my worth. I choose my peace. I choose my life. Now, let's talk about your freedom. If you were to create a Colin Simmons Community Center out of the ruins of your own past, what core value would you build it on? Every great story, and every great escape, has a true turning point. For me, it wasn't the lawsuit, or the name change, or even the shattered toast. It was the decision, made in the sterile silence of the ICU, to officially sever the emotional thread. The Fosters still held one piece of power over me, the hope that I might still be loved. That thread was woven with guilt, obligation, and the deep, primal desire for a mother's approval. Cutting it felt like a violent amputation, but it was necessary surgery for my soul. When I signed the DNR, "Do not resuscitate," for my mother and felt nothing but clinical calm, I knew. The McKinley who craved their love had died. I realized my moral duty was to myself, not to the toxic remnants of a broken family structure. The legal name change to Colin Simmons wasn't just bureaucracy, it was the physical manifestation of that ICU turning point. It declared to the world, and more importantly, to myself, I am self-created. My history is merely data, my identity is my own design. Every toxic family operates on a script. I was cast as the scapegoat, the failure, the one who would crawl back. The turning point was when I ripped up the script and improvised a completely new ending, one where I became the hero, and they became background noise. The money, the vast inheritance, was the ultimate trap. Had I taken it and bought a condo, the Fosters would still have felt superior, controlling the narrative of my success. The turning point was using the money not for pleasure, but for profound, public benevolence. By converting their mansion into the community center, I committed the ultimate act of rebranding. It was a physical, daily reminder that their control had been transformed into my compassion. That kind of intentional, visible shift is the only way to truly erase their influence. The turning point wasn't the getting of revenge, but the letting go of the need for them to suffer. Once they were financially ruined and publicly irrelevant, the anger was redundant. I traded the heavy, exhausting armor of rage for the light, durable cloak of indifference. The most painful part of the turning point was accepting that my brothers, Tyler and Brandon, would never apologize. They were too deeply invested in the hierarchy. They preferred to drown in their debt than to admit that their sister, the scapegoat, was right and was better. Breaking away meant embracing a magnificent loneliness, the realization that you must be your own primary source of validation and support. It's terrifying, but it is the prerequisite for all true independence. That initial, silent self-reliance was my emotional turning point. I spent decades waiting for the magic day when my mother would look at me and finally say, "I love you, and I'm proud." The turning point was realizing that day would never come. And then saying those words to myself, with absolute conviction, for the first time. Your turning point isn't a conversation. It's a signature on a document, a boundary in a text message, or the decision to change your phone number. It is an action taken for the simple, profound reason that you deserve peace. Take that action today. The story of McKinley Foster ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, firm decision to stop seeking validation from people who could only offer conditions. Colin Simmons began the moment I chose my own narrative over their toxic legacy. Every single action that followed, the revenge, the center, the peace, it all flowed from that one moment of absolute self-commitment. That is the definition of a true, life-altering turning point. The turning point is never easy, but it is always worth it. What small, irreversible action will you commit to taking this week to initiate your own, powerful turning point away from conditional living? My journey, from the shattered toast to the community center, teaches one crucial lesson: the best revenge isn't vindictive, it's magnificent. It's built not on their loss, but on your unstoppable growth. I traded inherited shame for self-made purpose. If you are fighting a toxic family, remember you are not alone. Your worth is fixed, regardless of their opinion. Draw that line. Change your name, change your life, but most importantly, change your narrative. You are the hero, not the footnote. This story is over, but your action is just beginning. Subscribe, hit the like button if my words resonated, and then look in the mirror. You deserve peace. You deserve freedom. Now go build it. Before you go, tell me, what is the one toxic belief about yourself, taught to you by others, that you are finally ready to destroy today? Let's distill this down to the core 5 lessons you need today. Lesson 1: True independence requires permanent distance. You cannot heal in the environment that made you sick. Lesson 2: Identity is your design. Change your name, change your city, change your friends, rebuild from the ground up. Lesson 3: Your success is your best revenge. Use the energy of your pain to fuel magnificent self-creation, not petty destruction. Lesson 4: Silence is your final power move. Stop explaining yourself, their understanding is irrelevant to your peace. Lesson 5: Choose reciprocity over obligation. Build a family that thrives on mutual respect. These aren't just concepts, they are the blueprint for your new life. Don't just watch my story, learn from it, apply it, and start your own escape. Hit subscribe and join this community of self-made survivors. Now that you have the blueprint, which of those 5 lessons will you apply first to make a permanent, positive change in your life this week?